Sometimes there are cases that are so evil and twisted, ones that don't make sense to those of us that are compassionate, loving people with a conscience. But there are monsters walking among us that seem to lack even the slightest bit of humanity. This is one of those stories. It'll leave you asking why and questioning whether you can truly know anyone, because some humans have truly evil minds. One Friday evening, in a quiet London neighborhood, a young woman stepped out for what should have been a quick walk to meet her date for dinner. It was a simple act that was part of her normal routine, something that everyone should feel safe doing. But this time was different. This time, she never made it home. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. And if you've never been here before, I'm Kimbyrleigha. It's nice to finally meet you. This case actually happened back in 2021, so not that long ago. And while researching, I noticed there was little to no coverage to begin with. And then the reporting that I did see released in the media, the news articles, even videos online, it was all created very soon afterward. So a lot of the facts were not available yet. And if you know me, I had to know more, so I decided that I would go digging. I wanted to know more, especially since some of the details that I read about didn't seem to make sense to me, and they were either misreported or unknown before everything was truly uncovered. So if you've heard of this case before, you might want to stick around because maybe you will learn something new and your questions might be answered. Before we get into it, let me take a moment to thank our new sponsor for today, and that is Quince. Quince is an online retailer that offers high-quality items for less. They have high-end styles at affordable prices that are 50 to 80% lower than similar brands, and there's something for everyone. Men, women, kids, babies, and even home goods. I found out about Quince when I was pregnant. I saw that they had things for Mazzy like swaddles, pajamas, sleep blankets, and more. I loved the variety and price point, and I started to explore the website, and I learned that Quince was started by individuals that were working for high-end brands but wanted the same quality to be available without the inflated price tags. I know all too well that these days it's so easy to buy items that don't stand the test of time because the made-to-last products are way out of my budget. But then you have to keep replacing those items because they easily fall apart. It's definitely happened to me with other brands. But Quince has a mantra: quality should never be a luxury. They believe everyone should be able to afford beautifully crafted essentials that stand the test of time. And I'm definitely on board with that. They even have a price comparison on every product page so you can see how much you'll save compared to other popular brands. So how do they do it? How do they make these things affordable? Well, Quince works directly with factories, removing the traditional retail middlemen from the equation altogether and passing on the savings to their customers. And that works for me. So I snagged a few cool items to try out and I love them, and that's why I'm introducing Quince to all of you. At the time, I was shopping with losing my baby weight in mind, being a new mom, and fall coming up. I wanted practical things, so I got this really cute black quilted tote with a lot of pockets because I knew it would need to function as a purse and a diaper bag. But if you love pockets, this is a perfect bag no matter what you use it for. It's got 10 pockets, 5 inside and 5 outside, plus a detachable pouch inside where I keep more of my personal girly things. I can easily remove it and bring it into the restroom very discreetly. If you know, you know. And I keep getting people asking me where I got this bag from, so now you know. And fun fact, it's also made from recycled materials and keeps plastic bottles out of oceans and landfills. That's another thing. Quince is committed to being safe and ethical. They work with factories with the same values, responsible manufacturing practices. I was just cleared to be active again postpartum, so I got this cute pair of ultra soft high-waisted leggings. They're light, breathable, and they're not see-through, so I feel confident wearing them and bending over to pick something up that fell out of Mazzy's stroller, for example. I've been living in these, getting in some steps outside, and they have a pocket for my phone, and they're stretchy, which is a must. They also have a hidden waistband pocket where you can put a card or a key on the go. Now, you've probably seen me wearing crop tanks like this. Yep, it's from Quince. Great for working out or just lounging, and for me, it's usually the latter, just wearing it while I edit. It's tight, but it's also comfy and soft, and it comes in several styles: halter, one shoulder, high neck, and polo, all with the same quality. And for fall, I got this very warm and versatile hooded Sherpa jacket. My favorite part about it is that it has a removable hood. It also has side pockets, which I find is rare these days with these cozy teddy bear style jackets. And I know my style isn't going to be exactly like yours, but Quince has a full range of items from organic cotton dresses, 100% cashmere sweaters, and high-performance workout gear, all starting at $30. So I highly recommend you treat yourself and upgrade your closet with Quince. Go to quince.com/Kimber for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. I want to give a big thank you to Quince for sponsoring today's video. Now let's get into the case for today. For today's story, I'm taking you into the heart of London, but not the bustling center you might imagine. No, we're actually heading to a place called Kimbyrleigha Village, a hidden gem nestled in southeast London's Royal Borough of Greenwich. Now, it's a much sought-after address, but this charming village was once a post-war wasteland. It was a relic of World War II, and the site used to serve as a base for the Royal Air Force, before laying dormant until the late 1960s, when it was transformed into the infamous Farrier Estate, which was an urban housing complex. It consisted of 74 blocks, ranging from 2-story houses to 13-floor towers, and it had a lot of promise. But it ended up becoming a symbol of failed urban planning when it began to deteriorate and people started to leave. And then it was completely abandoned by 2006, which left it looking like a post-apocalyptic ghost town. That is until 2009, when a new vision for the area emerged. From its desolate foundations, a £1 billion regeneration project breathed life into this barren land. They demolished everything, and by 2010, Kimbyrleigha Village was born. It's a self-contained, idyllic blend of modern living and natural beauty. It sounds like I'm doing an ad, but it is now a thriving community with parks, ponds, and plenty of green spaces. And at its heart lies Cater Park, an 86-acre oasis. Perfect for family fun. It's a popular place for picnics, bike rides, and playing outdoors, especially with its close to 3-acre designated playground. Kimbyrleigha Village has everything, so residents don't really need to leave. It has 2 on-site primary schools with really good ratings, and the village center, which consists of residents-only gyms and Sainsbury's supermarket, as well as a 24-hour concierge service in the retail hub. Now, it doesn't have a bustling nightlife, but a few cute pubs and restaurants walking distance from the townhomes and apartments nearby. At this point, I think you get the idea. Modern suburban living, a great place to raise children, but with the excitement and opportunities of London. Well, now that I've set the stage for you, I'll let you know that when this case took place, it was said that there had not been a murder in this location in over 50 years. That is, until an emergency call came in to the Metropolitan Police Department on the evening of September 18th, 2021. It was around 5:30 p.m. when a local Kimbyrleigha resident explained to the emergency operator that he'd been walking his dog through Cater Park. When he got to the backside of the youth community center called One Space, his dog began sniffing in a more erratic manner toward an area of tall grass off the path of the sidewalk. On first glance, the man thought his dog had found a potato sack in the bushes. I know. Why would a potato sack be there? But this was what he thought, what his mind thought he would recognize. But as he got closer, he realized it was a person that he actually believed had been simply resting or even sleeping. But as he got even closer, he noticed it appeared to be a young woman. He could see she was wearing a pair of sparkly boots and a black outfit, so he called out to her, believing that maybe she had a few too many drinks the night before and passed out. But he did think it was strange that it looked like she was covered in leaves. So he crouched down and he began to talk to her. She wasn't responding. And that's when he explained he brushed off some of those leaves and saw a lot of flies hovering around, which was his first clue that something wasn't right. But still, his mind wasn't registering what he was looking at. But upon further inspection, the position that she was in didn't seem natural. Her boots were facing the sky. Her neck was almost turned all the way back. And then he noticed the blood. Still, he attempted to find a sign of life by feeling her neck for a pulse, but there wasn't one. And she clearly wasn't breathing. He knew that he needed to call 999, but his phone was dead. So he ran to a person nearby who had been in the same area looking through the grass for a gold necklace they had lost. And he told them he had just found a body. And he asked if he could borrow their phone. As you can probably imagine, this was an extremely shocking and traumatizing experience for these 2 residents to find a body in a popular, well-traveled park in this very safe, close-knit community. Anyone could have stumbled upon this scene. So many children that are playing in this area, so many families that were enjoying the beautiful weather that weekend. It didn't seem real that a person was lying dead right there in the middle of the park. Of course, the police acted fast. Senior Metropolitan Police Detective Inspector Neil John and Detective Inspector Joe Garrity were leading this investigation. And as soon as the team got on the scene, they began cordoning off the area where the body had been found, and they put up a blue tent around the remains so that onlookers would not be able to catch a glimpse or, worse, take pictures. It was clear that the woman had suffered a violent death, and they were dealing with a homicide. Most of the injuries that could be seen with a preliminary examination were to her head. Now, a crime scene manager was called in. They're responsible for the forensic response to major crime scenes. And what's important to note, and we don't always think about this, is that when you're dealing with an outdoor crime scene, it's much different than dealing with finding a body, let's say, at a house, for example. When a crime scene is inside a building or a home, all the evidence is usually contained within the walls of that location, and investigators don't have to worry so much about things being contaminated due to inclement weather, for instance, and the person they find deceased usually has some connection to where they were found. Maybe they live there, or maybe the person who did this to them lived there. Those connections are a lot easier to make than finding someone outside and not knowing who they are, where they're from, and how they got there. There's going to be a lot of questions no matter where a body is found. There's a lot more unknowns when you're dealing with a crime scene outside, though. Did they die there? Were they placed there after they were killed? And of course, the condition of their body could be worse because of the elements, the heat, maybe the rain, maybe insect activity. All of those things compound an already very complicated situation. The forensics team noticed the same things that I told you police had observed. It was clear this woman suffered from head injuries. She had definitely been beaten with something, but there was no weapon nearby. But there were other important aspects in relation to her body that told a story. The body is the first place you're going to find a lot of clues about the crime. So in this case, the first thing investigators were looking at was the body itself, and then they were going to work outward. She was partially nude. Her top had been pulled all the way up, exposing her bra. Her skirt was also pulled up, and she wasn't wearing anything on the bottom except for her boots. Her body was positioned in a very provocative manner, in a sexually suggestive way. She was face up, her hands were in both of her pockets of her coat, and her legs were spread apart and positioned upward. She'd been covered in leaves in a sloppy attempt to conceal her remains. But there was one thing that stood out right away as very odd. There wasn't a lot of blood in the location where the body was found, even though she had very significant injuries. And investigators knew this meant she probably was attacked somewhere else and then brought to this location. Maybe she was moved so that she would be more visible to the public, to shock onlookers maybe, especially with the way she was positioned. It seemed like this was a way to shame her, to humiliate her, even in death, or this could have been a way so that she was found easier. They don't know. But now they have to find out where she was before she was brought there, which meant that their crime scene was about to get a lot bigger. And that can make it even more difficult to search for clues. The easy part in this case was actually identifying the victim. In most cases, that takes some time, but her passport was inside her coat pocket. The badly beaten woman that was found deceased in Cater Park was 28-year-old Sabina Nessa. Of course, when she was identified, the very next step was to contact her family as soon as possible. You don't want them to find out about this on the news, through media. You want them to be informed properly. But you also need to gather as much information from her family as possible, because maybe her family knew why she was in that location, or who she was with last, or if there was anyone who might want to harm her. It's difficult to quantify the devastation Sabina's family felt when they were notified of her death. Her parents had immigrated to the UK for a better and safer life for their family, and now they were about to learn their daughter had been murdered. Before I go there, let me tell you who Sabina Nessa was. Her father, Abdur Ralph, and her mother, Azabin Nessa, arrived in London from Bangladesh back in 1980. Her father found a job working as a chef, and soon the couple would welcome 4 daughters. Javina was the oldest. She was born in North London in 1991, and then just under a year later, Sabina was born on October 23, 1992 in Greenwich. At this point, the family moved to a red brick semi-detached council house on a quiet cul-de-sac in the town of Sandy, which is located in central Bedfordshire. And 10 years after Sabina was born, 2 more daughters would complete their family. Sabina's parents still lived in the same home when this tragedy occurred. They raised their daughters there, and they even became property owners by purchasing that home for £35,000. Since they'd been in the neighborhood so long, they were very well known, very well liked, and respected by their close-knit community. Everyone loved the Nessa girls. They were familiar faces in this area, known to be lovely young women who came from a really good family. Sabina and her older sister Sabina were very close. They had a very strong bond that continued throughout their adulthood. When they were little, the 2 of them shared a bedroom, and they loved to pretend they were teachers. They would actually go back and forth with one pretending they were the student and the other the teacher, and then they would switch. Sabina always took her role as a teacher very seriously. It was her nature to want to help others. The girls' close-knit family's Muslim faith was important to them, and Sabina would often raise money to give to individuals that were experiencing poverty back in her parents' homeland in Bangladesh. But beyond that, Sabina wanted to make sure she learned as much as she could because she saw the hardships her parents faced being unable to speak and write in English. Sabina actually made sure that she was able to step in for her mom and dad. She was the one that would deal with anything that came to replying to letters or answering to administrators at her school. She would interpret for her parents so that they were informed about what was going on. Sabina valued education from a very young age because she knew it would help her have a better life one day. She was known to be hungry for knowledge, and she would spend all of her extra money buying books. She always had a book with her, and when technology advanced, Sabina would enjoy reading the news on her phone, which was one of her daily routines. The sisters also enjoyed nature. They loved riding their bikes together in the park, and they had a lot of free space to play outside where they lived. Sabina was never happier than when she was outside. She loved animals as well. First, the girls had some birds as pets, and then they got 3 cats that they absolutely adored. Sabina just had such a caring nature about her. She was very lovable. She was also an excellent student. She got straight A's in school, and she enjoyed all of her subjects, but she really liked English and math. After Sabina graduated high school in 2011, the pretend games that she used to play with her sister became her reality. She decided she wanted to be a teacher. She was the kind of person who wanted to make a difference in the world by inspiring the minds of children. But it didn't end there. She dreamed of being a head teacher one day and to go teach a language to children abroad in Dubai. She loved kids. As a matter of fact, her loving and caring side made her a great aunt to her sister Sabina's children. When Sabina got married and moved to London, Sabina followed not too long afterward. She didn't want to be far from her closest sibling. They were like best friends. When Sabina moved to London, she enrolled at Greenwich University and studied sociology and graduated in 2014. Her personal tutor during her degree courses, a Dr. Louise Owensu Cartang, said that Sabina loved learning and she didn't have a bad bone in her body. And she was looking forward to Sabina making a difference in her future pupils' lives one day. After completing her undergraduate degree, Sabina went on to do a master's in teaching at the University of Bedfordshire. She wasn't all work and no fun, though. She was actually very outgoing and social. Out of the Nessa family, she was the only extrovert. She was loud, silly, opinionated but kind-hearted, and she was always making jokes. Her nieces would describe her as crazy, but what they meant was that she had a lot of energy and random outbursts of laughter. She spent a lot of time with them when they were little toddlers. She absolutely loved fashion, so she would introduce them to her favorite clothes and makeup. Sabina loved to shop. She liked buying makeup, purses, and shoes and enjoyed getting dressed up and looking pretty, and she was very pretty. She had long dark hair, olive skin, and striking dark soulful eyes, and sometimes she liked to wear light-colored contact lenses. She definitely stood out in a crowd, not only because of her looks, but because of the energy she brought with her wherever she went. She was described as being full of fun and a beautiful, kind soul, a girly girl, generous, funny, and determined. And that sums her up in words, but to really know Sabina was to truly love her. And her students loved her. Yes, she did end up becoming a teacher. After finishing her master's degree, Sabina obtained a qualification from Cambridge to teach English as a foreign language. She was well on her way to achieving all of her goals. For Sabina, life was good. Just a year after finishing her education, she landed her dream job in 2020. She became a Year 1 teacher at Rushy Green Primary School in Lewisham. She had a class full of 5- and 6-year-old students, and she treated each one of them as they were unique. For instance, if a student liked chess, She would start a chess club so that the other kids could get involved in what that student liked. She wanted all of her students to feel loved and included. According to her family, friends, and colleagues, Sabina took her first teaching job in this low-income area of London because she was well aware of the many challenges and discrimination children face. She knew that there was going to be a lot of suffering going on in the world, and she wanted to try her best to make a difference in these children's lives. She wanted them to tear down any barriers of disadvantage they may have so that they could reach their full potential. And even though Sabina had only been at the school a short amount of time, she made a big impact. Head teacher Lisa Williams described Sabina as a brilliant teacher and absolutely dedicated to her students. She would come to school early before anyone else, and she treated her classroom like her home. Lisa said Sabina would often buy flowers on her way to school and then display them in her classroom so everyone could enjoy them. And when the school chefs, Luke and Rob, began growing a few herbs and vegetables in the garden on the school grounds, Sabina was the first teacher to take her class to go have a look. She was always involved in everything that was going on with everyone. She chose to eat lunch with her students every day without fail. And she wouldn't just sit there watching them quietly. She would get involved. She would talk to them, encourage them, and she was part of their lives in more ways than just being their teacher. However, as passionate as Sabina was at ensuring other people's children were cared for, family always came first. There was a time when one of her nephew's parents could not afford lunch for him, and Sabina discreetly but generously paid for his food so that he could eat with his classmates and not feel left out. Sabina always made time for her family no matter how busy she got. She would speak with Jabina all the time, at least a few times a week, if not more, and she still made time to visit her parents' home in Bedfordshire. She would never come empty-handed either. She would burst through those doors with many shopping bags full of items, including flowers, clothes, and presents. Sabina was a bright light, selfless, always smiling, especially when talking about her students. When she visited with her family, she would share the latest thing that one of the kids in her class said or did, or even a picture they had drawn for her. She was so proud of each of them. Sabina lived in an apartment in Kidbrooke Village off of Astle Road. I'm going to be showing this on the map if you're watching. If not, it's quite all right. I always explain everything. These apartments were part of that regeneration plan I told you about that began in 2010. They're luxury-style apartments that come fully furnished with modern designer kitchens and bathrooms, hardwood floors, mood lighting, and spacious balconies overlooking the beautiful landscaping and green areas throughout Kidbrooke. They even have a concierge service and an on-site gym, everything you would need. Sabina lived with her roommate, and she was very proud of their living space. She would bring fresh flowers home and put them around the apartment. Sabina loved the nearby Cater Park. There was an entrance that was only a couple minutes walk from her building, and she would go there all the time to enjoy the outdoors. She also enjoyed exploring new places with her friends. Living in London meant plenty of nightlife, attractions, and restaurants, and Sabina enjoyed all it had to offer. She was also nearing 30 years old and thinking about her future and having kids of her own one day. But she never got the chance to experience that because she never made it to age 29. Her body was found just a month before her next birthday and just 200 feet from her front door, lying lifeless in the sprawling Cater Park. Now let's jump back to the investigation. Authorities were doing their best to locate Sabina's next of kin to make that death notification. Meanwhile, they have expanded this crime scene and cordoned off a larger portion of Cater Park. They brought in drones and they began combing the area for evidence, but they weren't really finding anything significant by doing the normal line search of the park. Sabina's body was found on the backside of the One Space Community Youth Center. There's a skate park and meeting areas, and One Space is a Christian community center on the edge of the Kidbrooke Village development. The building has a cafe as well as offices where young people could meet up. So at this point, they don't know when Sabina had been killed. So they began looking for witnesses who may have seen something out of the ordinary. At the same time, investigators began looking for cameras nearby that might have captured the attack on video. And luckily, since this was a newer development, this park had a number of cameras along the pathways, so they went about obtaining all of the CCTV footage they could. Sabina's body was then removed and taken to the mortuary for a post-mortem examination. It didn't take long for people to notice all of the commotion that was happening in the middle of their community. It was quite obvious by the blue tent in the park that someone had died there. And of course, everyone wanted to know what was going on in such a popular and well-traveled area where kids and families walk every single day. And soon, there was a lot of buzz within the community. People were walking up, they were asking officers what happened. But of course, the authorities remained tight-lipped until they had more information and had notified Sabina's loved ones. All night, officers stood guard outside the park's perimeter so that no evidence would be disturbed, and by the next day, Sabina's mother and father, as well as a couple of her sisters, had been notified about the heartbreaking news. Even though Sabina was so close and in frequent communication with her sister Jabina, she had no idea Sabina was missing until she got the news that her body had been found. Can you imagine? Her phone rang in the morning on Sunday, September 19th, the morning after Sabina had been discovered. Jabina was busy with her kids, so her husband answered, and she actually thought that it was going to be Sabina calling, but instead it was one of their other sisters to inform them that Sabina was dead. When Jabina's husband relayed the news, she was in shock. She said her whole world fell apart, and she later said she couldn't have imagined the horror of that call. Jabina and her husband immediately left their home, and they made their way to their parents' house in Bedfordshire. They didn't have much information up to this point. The only thing they knew was that Sabina had been found deceased. While they were on their way, Jabina was so desperate for information about what happened to her sister that she was frantically conducting Google searches from her phone. The only information she was able to find was that the body of a young woman had been found close to where Sabina lived. And at that point, she made her husband pull the car over to the side of the road, and she began yelling and saying, "Could this be Sabina?" She described the journey to her parents' house as horrendous. Even when she and her husband arrived, the wait wasn't over. It took another hour for the police to meet them there, and Jabina said that this was the longest hour of their lives. When the authorities did arrive, they gave her family even more bad news. Not only had Sabina been found deceased, but she had also been murdered. As you can imagine, her parents were absolutely devastated and beside themselves with grief. They were inconsolable. And Sabina's father, it's so sad, but he went door to door in their neighborhood to deliver the news in person about the death of his daughter to all their neighbors. And I can't imagine how horrible this poor family must have felt. You do not think that something like this will ever happen to someone so close to you. And that's exactly what Jabina said, that she never thought that they'd be going through something like this. Who would have wanted this kind young woman dead? That's what everyone wanted and needed to know. Investigators had to work backward to find out what Sabina was doing before she was killed. So the next person they wanted to interview was Sabina's roommate. And this is when some context is finally added to Sabina's story. Her roommate told investigators that on Friday night, September 17th, Sabina was going on a first date with a guy that she met earlier that year. They had plans to meet at a local bar and restaurant called Depot. Here in the US, we would actually pronounce this as Depot, but it's an area of Kidbrooke called Pegler Square, where all the other shops, restaurants, and businesses are located. It's a nice, modern establishment with booths outside in the beer garden, so you can enjoy a meal and a drink under the night sky. And inside, there's a full bar and lots of cozy couches and booths and tables to sit at. Sabina's roommate said that she had gotten all glammed up, wanting to look her best in anticipation of her night out. She was excited to be finally meeting up with this guy that she had been talking to after their friendship had turned into something more recently. Investigators asked if Sabina seemed nervous about this meetup, and her roommate said no, not nervous. She was happy about seeing him, but she was running late. On Fridays, the depot closes at 11 p.m., and they stop serving food at 9:30. And Sabina was still at her apartment when her date texted her a little before 8:30 via WhatsApp, letting her know he was already at depot, and he asked where she was. She told him that she was just about to leave, and that was around 8:32 p.m. Now, it's obvious that Sabina was running behind, and she wasn't driving that night since she knew she might have a few drinks, and the walk from her place to the depot via the main roadway would have only taken roughly 12 minutes. However, she wasn't found on the main road. She was found inside the park, and if she had cut through Cater Park, it would have shaved off at least a few minutes. Considering the investigators now realized that Sabina didn't want to keep her date waiting, they assumed she took a shortcut through the park and someone either followed her, crossed her path, or they knew that she would be there and they took that opportunity to attack and kill her. But it still didn't make sense. The thing is, this wasn't typical for Sabina. Her roommate explained that she was very cautious, and she even mentioned in the past that she was nervous about being in that park at night, even though it was in a safe area. She would rather take the long way anytime she was going to Pegler Square. She was never able to explain exactly why she got a bad vibe from Cater Park at night. Maybe it was the looming shadows of the tall trees, or maybe it was intuition about the role that this area would later play in her future. We will never know. But on this occasion, she must have made a compromise. Her roommate told investigators that she became worried later in that night when Sabina had not returned to their apartment. She began texting her, but not getting an answer, and she said it wasn't like her not to reply to messages. She also told investigators that she never thought something like this could happen to her, and she no longer feels safe living there. Many people would feel the same way once the word got out about Sabina's murder. It was still only a couple days after she had been found, so the information provided to the public was sparse. The night of Sabina's murder, the London sunset was 7:10 p.m., so it would have already been dark when Sabina left her apartment. But even at that hour, there would have been people in the park, some doing the same thing Sabina was doing, taking a shortcut to bars or restaurants or making their way home from work. So maybe someone saw something. Of course, the next person investigators want to speak with is Sabina's date, a man that they found out was 10 years older than her, and he might have been the last person to have contact with her. They actually arrested him under suspicion of murder, and they held him for questioning, because 90% of women are killed by someone they know, so they start there. But to cut to the chase, it was clear that this man was not involved, so he was free to go. But they had a better lead, an eyewitness. It wasn't a person, it was CCTV footage. London is one of the most surveilled cities in the world, with recent estimates suggesting that there are between 600,000 to close to 1 million cameras in the city. And many of these cameras are operated by businesses or private entities, which can make it hard to gain access to them. But in this case, the community in the immediate area was outraged when they found out a woman had been brutally murdered just steps from her front door, in a park which was considered safe. Several camera owners actually submitted the footage to investigators. They had dashboard cameras, doorbell cameras, and security footage. But investigators had already accessed the park's CCTV footage from the area right near where Sabina's body was found. And even though it is newer equipment, we know these videos are notoriously grainy and bad quality, and this footage was no exception. But it was all they had. They began looking at it right after 8:30 p.m. on Friday night. And hauntingly, they soon realized that Sabina's entire murder was captured on video. And although they can't make out any characteristics of the person who killed her because the position of the camera was overhead, so they can't see facial features, they can't ascertain ethnicity, age, or even the color of their clothing, so they can't make an identification, but it appeared to be a male subject. But now they've answered one question. They know how Sabina was killed. And I'm going to warn you, this is very brutal and shocking. Now, of course, they never released the actual footage, but the official reports have described it in detail. First, they were able to identify Sabina from the description her roommate gave them of what she was wearing that night. A dark top, a skirt, tights, a coat, and sparkly boots. Through the various cameras, they spot Sabina crossing a small bridge from Astle Road near her apartment complex in Decatur Park, and she continued to walk down the footpath. Next, she crossed over Cambert Way and continued to walk on the main sidewalk through the park. And that's when the camera captured a hooded figure that emerged from under the trees, and he walked in her direction and actually crossed her path. He looked straight at her. As she continued to make her way towards the direction of the depot, the attacker kept walking away from her. It was as though he was looking around to make sure no one was close by, and then he quickly turned back towards Sabina's direction and looked her way, probably making sure that that area was clear as well. And then he ran back to where Sabina was at a very rapid pace, approaching her from behind with something in his hand. And right when he's on her heels, she probably heard his footsteps because she starts to turn her head behind her, and that's when he begins a frenzied attack on this poor woman. It was just blow after blow in a very quick succession, again and again and again, striking her in the head and face repeatedly without warning. Sabina was completely caught off guard, but she did attempt to defend herself, but sadly, she was no match for how ferocious this beating was. The investigators slowed the video down and they counted 34 strikes to Sabina's head. 34. That is disgusting. It makes me sick to my stomach to think about. And finally, Sabina collapsed right over a park bench. She appeared to be unconscious at this point, and the perpetrator literally throws this poor girl over his shoulder and carries her toward that area that was not within the view of the cameras. It's up a bank and covered with tall grass and several trees. And for the next 10 minutes, there's no sign of Sabina or her attacker. But then only he reemerges from the area where Sabina's body was ultimately found, and he makes his way back to that bench and begins picking up pieces of the weapon that he used to harm Sabina. It had broken during this attack. That's the force he used. It wasn't clear what this item was at the time, but then the attacker is seen going back to where Sabina was taken off camera, and he's gone for another 10 minutes. And there's no way to know what he was doing to her in that 20 minutes that the cameras didn't catch his actions, but there are clues, and it's not good. After that second 10-minute period off camera, he returned to the bench a second time, and he took out what appeared to be wet wipes, and he began wiping down the bench where Sabina had fallen. Clearly, this man knew a thing or two about forensics because he was manipulating this crime scene. He was trying to get rid of any evidence of him or Sabina being in that location, but now that investigators know where the murder took place, they make that their new focus. They swab the bench and the surrounding area for blood, DNA, and they dust for any fingerprints that may have been left behind. Because they know what Sabina was wearing before the attack, they were also able to conclude that the killer removed her tights as well as her underwear because she was not wearing either of those items when she was found. However, what struck them as very odd was the fact that the attacker would have had to remove her boots to take off the underwear and tights, but Sabina was found with her boots on both her feet. Therefore, this pervert took his time to put them back on her after what he did to her. With the way that she was posed, it would have enabled him to have full intimate access to her. And according to detectives, there didn't seem to be any other reason to remove those lower items of clothing, exposing her top half and leaving her with her legs open, unless there had been sexual conduct, especially because he took that clothing with him from the scene, most likely to avoid there ever being a trace of his DNA being found on them. Either that, or investigators suggested he could have taken them as trophies, but considering they watched him clean up the scene, they believed it was the former theory, a sexually motivated crime to take advantage of a beautiful woman who was walking all alone at night. He targeted her. He was watching, waiting, stalking that park, looking for prey. They now believe that this could actually be a random attack and that this man may not have had any connection with Sabina, but they couldn't be sure. After the savage attack, the man is seen pulling his hood back over his head and casually walking away around 8:56 p.m. He could have gone anywhere because once he walked out of the sight of the cameras, they weren't sure in which direction he left. And this park is pretty big with many different ways to come and go. The CCTV in the park doesn't cover every nook and cranny, just the main path. So they wonder, did this man walk here or drive? Does he live nearby? Was he casing this area for a while? They don't know. But they want to know which way he went so they could pull CCTV footage from that area because they want to narrow this down. Otherwise, they will be spending hours upon hours scouring through a number of videos, and time is of the essence. They have a violent killer on the loose who's likely to strike again or get away with this. The next step was to look at more CCTV footage from the areas around the park and the surrounding buildings and businesses, and then to keep moving outward until they found something. They knew very little about the killer's physical appearance, but they were going to try very hard to locate anyone who was in that location on the night that this happened and went through that park. And then there was this other officer who was dedicated to combing through that park footage. It took him 7 days, but he finally noticed something. It actually ended up being one of the biggest breaks in this entire case, yet it was so minute that everyone else missed it except for him. Moments after the killer walked off camera, there was a flash of light that peeked through the darkness. It was probably only a millisecond. If you blink, you would miss it. The flash appeared to be coming from an object the killer was holding. Could it be a phone? They weren't sure. But I have a portion of this footage, and I'm going to play it for you. But you have to look closely because it only glows for a second, if that. So here goes. Did you see it glimmering? It's right there. I'm going to slow it down, and then I'm going to blow it up and play it again. Ready? Okay, do you see it? Now I'm going to freeze the frame as it's lighting up. It's right there. You see that? It's almost like something lit up as the killer walked by. And you might be wondering, why is this important? Well, because now they know what direction he was leaving the park. That, coupled with the time frame they have, they can focus on the cameras in that direction, in that area, which appeared to be an entrance off of Pegler Square. I'm showing it on the screen if you're watching. The investigators scour CCTV footage from stores and businesses in that area looking for anyone coming and going around the time before and after the attack. I'm telling you all these details because it's what I do, but it's also because I want you to recognize all of this work. A lot of work went into this. Detectives did hundreds and hundreds of hours, piecing so much together to connect all the dots and catch a killer. On one of the cameras, they see a car arrive at Pegler Square at 7:41 p.m. that same night. So about 50 minutes before Sabina had even left her apartment, I'm going to show it to you on this map how close it was to the park. It's just across the street. And the car was around this area right here. It pulls in parallel parks. It's the proximity to the park that makes this car stand out. I have the CCTV footage as well, and you can see the driver moving around with their phone in their hand inside. But this camera angle doesn't show much. Again, it's grainy, it's black and white, and the license plate isn't in view. However, I learned this. London has ANPR cameras on all their roadways, and ANPR is short for automatic number plate recognition. So as drivers make their way around town, their license plate is recorded, which I think is pretty cool. I love technology. So investigators go and they pull all this footage and records from the nearest ANPR camera, but it's just their luck that it was not working properly that night. So it did not record this vehicle's license plate number. And that has to be so frustrating because just when you think you have this big lead, you have nothing. But at least they could see this car. It was a light color, maybe beige, silver, or white, and there were enough characteristics to know it was a Nissan. So they have a Nissan expert come in, take a look at the footage, and they're able to determine from the tires, the rims, the headlight style, the make, model, and the year of the vehicle. It was a newer Nissan Micra, only about a year old, and I don't think we have these here in the US, so I'm going to put an example up on the screen of what it looks like. Meanwhile, another camera picked up something else that investigators believe was very relevant to this case. They think it could be an image of the killer after he fled the scene. It's footage from Pegler Square right after the attack. The video shows a balding man who looked like he had a lighter complexion, wearing a black hoodie, light-colored pants, and black shoes with a thick white sole. He's also carrying something peculiar in his hands, and it appears to be a red object. As he walks into frame, he's looking around him and behind him as though he's checking to make sure no one's around. And then he pulls his hood up over his head. Very suspicious, kind of exactly what the killer did on camera when he was leaving the park. Several minutes later, another camera in this vicinity picked up the same man as he got into that vehicle that I showed you, the one parked on the side of the road, and then he sped away from the area. At this point, the police release still shots of this man and the car driving away. They confirm it's a silver Nissan Micra, and they ask the public for tips. And Detective Chief Superintendent Trevor Lowry held a press conference about a week after Sabina was murdered. It was on September 23rd, right outside the park where her body was found. And by now, the news of Sabina's murder had spread, and the public was outraged. They wanted answers, and Detective Lowry was pleading with the public to come forward if they were in the area that Friday night and saw anything. And I'm going to play this clip.
Sabina, we believe, was walking from her home address. Her journey would have seen her walk through Cater Park, and we believe as she walked through the park, she was approached by an individual and fatally attacked. Sabina's body was sadly found by a member of the public around 5:30 p.m. the following day. As anyone who lives here will know, Cater Park is well used by the community, and we are appealing for anyone who was here on Friday evening and who thinks they saw anything unusual to come forward. Maybe you saw someone acting strangely inside the park or running away from it. If you were in the area, please think back and let us know if you have any information. You will see that we have an extensive crime scene in place, and we expect it to be here for the next couple of days.
It wasn't just the brutal circumstances of Sabina's death that came as a shock to this community. Sabina's murder came just a few months after another young woman named Sarah Everard, a 33-year-old marketing executive, was killed by Wayne Cousins, an off-duty police officer who had falsely arrested her for pretending that she had breached COVID-19 regulations. Instead of bringing her to the station, he drove her 80 miles away, forced himself upon her, strangled her to death, and then later he burned her body and disposed of her remains in a nearby pond. Sarah's death had made headline news both nationally and internationally due to the fact that she was simply walking along the street minding her own business when she was killed, and that's scary. And it's also very worrisome. There was a significant group of citizens who were outspoken about the lack of safety for women and girls in London. I think we can say the same about the United States. When Sarah was killed, an organization called Reclaim These Streets was formed to hold a vigil for her and all women affected by male violence. They called for social change. Women should not be afraid to walk alone. They should be allowed to be free to walk the streets without being in fear for their lives. But as most women know, the reality is we are afraid. We're taught to be cautious, not to wear anything revealing, to travel in groups, all because men want us for their pleasure and then want to kill us and discard us like trash when they're finished with us. Just like so many other women like Sarah and now Sabina and countless others. Another aspect of Sabina's case that bothered her family and the public was that her murder did not attract the same media attention as Sarah's. There was definitely a disparity in the media coverage, and some people claimed it was because Sabina wasn't white like Sarah was. And I gotta tell you, there is some truth to this. Missing white woman syndrome is real. It's the media's bias against missing people of color. They just do not get the same amount of media coverage, and therefore their cases are not talked about as much or even known at all. This syndrome also encompasses a disproportionate media attention to females who are young, attractive, white, and upper middle class. It had been a week, and social media was finally starting to react to Sabina's murder, with some people wondering why they're just now becoming aware of such a brutal killing of yet another innocent woman. Celebrities began weighing in, with Jameela Jamil, Emma Barnett, and Tracy Ann Oberman among them. Jameela posted, quote, "I don't want to hear more public warnings about women not walking in parks in the evening. I'm tired of women being burdened with treating the symptoms of men's violence against women. Treat the damn cause, men's violence. This is a man problem that women pay the price for," end quote. Actress Tracy Ann Oberman posted, quote, "Let's never forget hashtag Sabina Nessa. News channels keep the pressure on and the story up. So close after hashtag Sarah Everard. We need to reclaim the streets. Women have to be safe and feel safe. Tragic and sickening. Thoughts with her family," end quote. And Emma Barnett added, quote, "Sabina Nessa, the 28-year-old schoolteacher killed in a park. A vigil will be held tomorrow. 6 months on from the murder of Sarah Everard. What has to change?" End quote. And it's true. I can get on board with all three of those statements. When is it going to change? And why are we paying the price for something that men decide to do? That vigil was held on Friday, September 24th at 7 p.m. right in Pegler Square, where that CCTV footage captured both the car and that suspicious man. It's also the location where Sabina had been planning to meet her date. Over 500 people showed up to honor Sabina and support her family. Sabina's sister, Jabina, spoke, breaking down in tears as she addressed the crowd. She said, quote, "I just want to say thank you to everyone who came today to show support for my sister. We have lost an amazing, caring, beautiful sister who left this world far too early," end quote. And her husband took her side as she began to cry. Here's a clip of that now.
"I just want to say thank you for everyone who came here to show the support and respect for my sister. We have lost an amazing, caring, beautiful sister who left this world far too early. She didn't reach her 29th birthday next month. Sabina loved her family. We had lost our sister. My parents have lost their daughter. And my girls have lost such a brilliant, loving, caring auntie who dearly loved her. Words cannot describe how we are feeling. This feels like we are stuck in a bad dream and can't get out of it."
Remember, while all of this is going on, the killer is still out there, and by now, the autopsy results had come in. Sabina's wounds were horrific, as I already told you. She was hit 34 times in the head with a blunt object. Her skull was fractured. She had several broken ribs, and her liver had sustained damage. She had also been strangled, and she was in such bad condition that it was not clear how she died. It could have been the trauma to her head or asphyxiation, so her cause of death was labeled as undetermined. But the manner of death was, of course, homicide. There were also defensive wounds to her right hand. And although there were no injuries to Sabina's private areas and no evidence of the presence of anyone else's bodily fluids, the removal of her tights and underwear and the way in which her outer clothing was moved and how she was positioned all pointed to her being violated. The pressure was on to find her killer. Investigators decided to gather all ANPR records for Nissan Micras that passed within a 2-mile radius of the crime scene on the night of Sabina's murder and between the time the killer left the park and about 2 hours before. And there were hundreds of owners that needed to be looked into. After about 60 had been ruled out, one particular vehicle stood out, not just because it was a newer silver Nissan Micra, but because it wasn't usually in this area ever. The ANPR records show how many times a license plate has ever been recorded traveling into a specific area, and this Nissan Micra had been purchased and registered in the last year or so in a town called Eastbourne, which is about an hour and a half away from Kidbrooke. It's a seaside town in East Sussex, England, and the only time this vehicle had ever traveled to London was on the day of Sabina's murder. And I mean, that would definitely stand out. It's like they came there just to kill her. So who was this person, and why would they target her? Investigators didn't know the why, but now they knew the who. The owner of that car was a 36-year-old man named Kochi Selimaj. They run a simple background check on him, and they learn he has no prior conviction, so naturally, they were perplexed. They wondered if this guy had anything to do with this crime, or if it was just his car that was used to commit it. It seems unusual that a person with no criminal record would commit such a heinous murder. But remember, just because there's no record doesn't mean they haven't committed a crime. Maybe they just haven't gotten caught yet. And now once again, they need to backtrack to find out what Kochi was doing in the days leading up to Sabina's murder and who he was. So they do a little more digging. Kochi was born in Elbasan, Albania, to his father Bashkim and his mother Tefta, and he spent his childhood in one of the poorest parts of Elbasan. The apartment they lived in was small, and it was located at the top of a crumbling set of stairs in an old 5-story building. Kochi's neighbors remember him as a nice boy that used to play with other children when he was growing up. There really are no jobs available in this area, so the unemployment rate is very high, and many residents are impoverished. To make ends meet, they usually resort to selling homegrown vegetables, secondhand clothing, or other odds and ends as street vendors. But since many people in this community can't afford food and clothing, it's not a booming business. It's a very sad situation. Kochi's father was lucky enough to be able to work as a builder and brought in some extra money, while Kochi's mother stayed home to raise him, his older brother, and 2 sisters. Her family were cattle farmers, and they lived in the countryside in a very remote part of Albania. The Selimaj family was known to their community, and Kochi's parents were considered to be good, respectable people. Kochi's father knew they were very poor, and that there were no opportunities for young men where they lived. So he had high hopes that his sons would find opportunities elsewhere. So 20 years earlier in 2001, Kochi, who had dropped out of high school, was 16 years old, and he left Albania with his older brother. By 2015, 30-year-old Kochi had other plans, and that is when he immigrated to England. However, his move to the UK wasn't for the same noble reasons as Sabina's parents. He came there illegally. Kochi paid someone to transport him to England, hidden in the back of a truck. He arrived in the seaside city of Eastbourne and began establishing himself by starting to work odd jobs here and there. Ultimately, he found a job at ESK Car Wash during the day, and he would deliver pizzas for Domino's at night so he could get ahead. His coworkers said that he was very ambitious. He wanted to do better in life, especially because he had met a Romanian woman in 2007 who was 9 years older than him, and he wanted to settle down. Her name is Ionela Gurgaina, and she's a European national. The two began dating even though it seemed like they were a bit mismatched, not just because of the age gap, but neither one of them practiced the same religion or spoke each other's languages. Kochi was Muslim and Ionela was Christian. He wasn't religious, but she was. However, both of them knew enough Italian to be able to communicate with one another, and those who knew them said they were truly in love. There were pictures on Ionela's Facebook page that included a photo of them smiling together with the caption saying, quote, "London with my lover forever together," end quote. Another picture shows them in Brighton. Kochi is dressed nicely in a dark suit and tie, and Ionela is wearing a strapless turquoise dress, and they look very happy together, just an ordinary couple. That it wasn't just a relationship of convenience in order for, let's say, Kochi to stay in the UK. Because she was a citizen of the European Union, she was allowed to live in the country legally, while Kochi was still in the country illegally. But as luck would have it, just before Brexit was signed into law, the government announced that spouses of EU citizens would be allowed to stay in the country legally and permanently. So it does make you wonder, did Coach E want to marry her to stay? But instead, it seemed like they were genuinely in love. Friends said they were very affectionate with one another, and by November 5th of 2018, on Bonfire Night, they were married at City Hall among a group of their friends. Bonfire Night, I did not know this, it's celebrated across the UK. There's fireworks, bonfires, sparklers, and toffee apples. And the reason they do this is because it's the anniversary of a failed attempt to blow up the Houses of Parliament. So after getting married, the couple moved into an apartment above the shops on the high street in Eastbourne. Ianella ended up getting a job as a part-time belly dancer and as a maid in a nearby hotel, while Coachy switched to working as a gas station attendant so that he could save more money for a better apartment. He told his friends that marrying Ianella was the best thing that ever happened for him. Coachy still went back to Albania to see his family every now and then. His last trip home was September of 2020. So with everything investigators pulled up on Coachy, from the background check, interviewing coworkers and friends, and even people from his own town, they wondered, was this really the guy they were looking for? What reason would he have to murder Sabina? It really wasn't making sense. There were no known connections between them at all. However, Coachy did look like the man that they saw on the footage, holding up that red item in his hand in Pegler Square on the night of the murder. And he drove the exact same car that was spotted there. I mean, he is either the most unluckiest man alive at this very moment, or he was involved. Remember that they're still backtracking his steps. And as they gather more ANPR data from tracking the Nissan, they see that it had been at the Grand Hotel in Eastbourne on the same day of Sabina's murder, Friday, September 17th. This hotel is only a 5-minute drive from Coachy's home, so they wondered what business he would have over there, since they didn't think he would need or even be able to stay in a place like that, because if you're not familiar, because I wasn't, this is a very luxurious oceanside hotel. I took one look and I've never seen anything like it. The name says it all. It's grand. It's extravagant. It's ivory tower after tower of rooms, and inside, it's just gorgeous. It looks like royalty would live there. It's around 325 pounds a night, which is roughly $420 US. So this is a really nice hotel, one that you would stay at for a special occasion unless you're very wealthy. So what was the occasion? Well, here's where things get interesting. Police contacted the hotel to inquire about whether they had a record of Coachy being there as a guest, and they said yes. The staff explained that Coachy had come into the hotel on Tuesday, September 14th, and asked to pre-book a room for Friday the 17th. Well, since it was so last minute, they only had one room still available, and it was even more costly than usual. But he said he didn't care. He was very determined to get this room. He worked at a gas station for minimum wage, so this was well outside his standard of living. Investigators wondered what this hotel would have to do with the murder, since it's over an hour and a half away from Kidbrooke. Well, that's when the staff explained they had an issue with Coachy. When he came in to check in on Friday, they ended up calling Sussex Police non-emergency line to report an incident. Interesting. At around 1:15 p.m. on Friday afternoon, Coachy arrived in the lobby to check into his room. This was captured on video, and I have this clip. You can see him in the bottom left of the screen. He comes through the door carrying a duffel bag and makes his way to the front desk. During check-in, he becomes irate. He's yelling at the staff when they ask him for his credit card to prepay for the room. He said, "You already have my banking details. Why do I need to pay before I've even stayed?" He was causing a scene and making the staff uneasy. But it wasn't just because he was being difficult. It was because some of them knew who he was. Yeah. His estranged wife worked at this hotel as a housekeeper. Estranged wife. Coachy and Ianella had split up a month before this in August. Ianella decided to move out due to things not working out between them anymore. The staff was well aware that they were not on the best terms, so it struck them as very odd that he was trying to check into a room at the hotel where she worked. It was a red flag. They knew he lived close by, that he didn't need a place to stay, so they weren't quite sure what he would be doing there, and something just didn't feel right about the situation. They figured that he most likely wanted to impress her, a last-ditch effort to try to get her to take him back, to show her that he could afford to give her the nicer things in life. Instead of being an employee, she would be an honored guest that night. But it didn't work out. About an hour after he settled in, he messaged Ianella on WhatsApp from his room on the 3rd floor while she was working on the floor below him, and she had no idea at this time that he was staying at the hotel because she was busy working and was not notified about it yet. He asked her to meet him in the parking lot just to have a chat, without mentioning that he had just checked in at the same hotel she was working at. She thought that he had just driven over to her work to talk about their relationship, and at this point, they had been broken up for about 6 weeks. He had made a number of attempts to try to get her back. At this point, he appeared desperate, and it did seem like it had something to do with his citizenship and also his pride. The truth was, Ianella wasn't interested in getting back together, but she hoped if they talked one final time, he would get the closure he needed and get the message that she was done, and then maybe he would finally leave her alone. Many people in similar situations as Ianella feel the exact same way. They hope that they'll be able to get through to this person that they once loved if they just try hard enough. But people like Coach cannot be convinced, and no amount of persuasion is going to change their mind. They feel entitled to control and dominate their partners. They liken them to possessions, and they believe they have ownership over them. And this sense of entitlement is often reinforced by their inability to empathize with others, all of which makes it nearly impossible for them to recognize or accept that their actions are unwanted and invasive. And if they can't accept that what they're doing is wrong, then they definitely won't be able to accept that someone wouldn't want them to do it to them anymore. But in this case, Ianella decided to acquiesce. She met him outside the hotel in the parking lot. He wanted to talk inside his car, which was parked outside, and he got in the driver's seat while she got in the passenger side, and they began their chat. But midway through the conversation, Coach is convinced that in order to make everything right between them, all they have to do is just have sex, because maybe being intimate would remind Ianella of what they have, their bond. So he suggested that they get into his back seat, and he climbs back there and tries to convince her to join him. But Ianella felt tricked. It made her feel disgusted that it seemed like all he wanted to do was sleep with her, and the thought of having sex with him was appalling at this point. She realized that this whole conversation was pointless, and she knew in that moment he was never going to change, and she did not want to take him back. So she leaves without speaking another word to him. And when she gets back into the hotel, that is when her boss informs her about the altercation in the lobby earlier that day, and that Coach was actually booked into a room there. This makes her very uneasy. She explained that he appeared very agitated when they met in the parking lot. She wasn't sure what was bothering him, but he was acting strange from the moment they met up. This is when Sussex police were contacted. It was around 4:40 p.m. A hotel staff member said they wanted to report an unruly guest and explained that there had been a disagreement between Coach Selimaj and the reception desk at the hotel, and that initially it was in regard to him not wanting to pay for his room. In addition, Ianella explained everything that I just told you, that her estranged husband was staying at the hotel, and it made her feel uncomfortable. It was clear Coach wasn't there for a luxurious getaway. He was there for her. He knew the only place that he could access Ianella without her being able to escape or get away from him in any way was at work, because she wasn't going to risk her job. The staff went on to explain to police that he had been hanging around the lobby pretending to read a newspaper or look at tourist pamphlets, but then he was watching and waiting for Ianella. It wasn't just Ianella who felt uneasy. Coach would leer at other women who walked through the lobby, and he would stare them up and down without trying to hide what he was doing. Coach's behavior made the staff and the guests at the hotel very uncomfortable, but no matter how many times they told him to please stop doing it, he would come back and do it again. So now things are coming together, sort of. At least they now know that things were not good in the marriage between Ianella and Coach. And even though Coach was creating a nuisance at the hotel, he wasn't technically doing anything illegal. So the police considered the altercation resolved, and they did not send an officer out to the hotel. Things seemed to be okay after this because Ianella saw Coach drive off in his Nissan away from the premises and figured that maybe he would just go home and not come back. But instead, when the police traced where his vehicle went next through the cell phone data and ANPR records, around 5 p.m., he drove to Brighton. Now, I want you to recall this picture and caption on Ianella's Facebook profile. It mentioned them going on a date in Brighton. So maybe this was his way of reminiscing about the good times. Or maybe it was something much more sinister. Brighton is 30 miles away, and he was just driving up and down the streets aimlessly, back and forth, like he was stalking someone, waiting for someone or targeting them, but who? Presumably a victim. To investigators, it seemed like Coach E decided that he needed to satisfy his craving for sex. Ianella had rejected his advances, so he was determined to find someone who couldn't say no. Was he looking for someone specific, or was he just randomly scouting for a potential victim, a woman, alone, unsuspecting, that he could just take advantage of? Now, I noticed this area was mostly residential, but there were also some parks and green areas where you could hide, and a college nearby, the University of Brighton. Perhaps he was prowling for a university student, which is terrifying. The dorm residential buildings are really easy to access. They're right off the main road with dense woods behind them. But maybe it was too bright outside at the time and too many people were around for him to carry out an attack. Instead, it seems like he decided to try to increase his odds, so he heads to London, where there's a population of 10 million people. London, another place where he and Ianella posed for a picture, which she posted on her Facebook page in happier times. Is it a coincidence? Who knows? Maybe these were the two places he had ever gone. We don't know, but for whatever reason, he targets the South London area of Kidbrooke, an hour and a half away, and he arrives in the area around 7:41. His car is captured on traffic cameras entering town, and minutes later, his car pulls into Pegler Square, where it was first spotted during the investigation. Next, they locate CCTV for all the businesses that were open at the time, and they catch a glimpse of him entering the Sainsbury's supermarket at 7:46 p.m. This is just 200 feet away from where he parked. At this point, innocent Sabina is getting ready at her apartment just streets away from where this man is planning his attack. How do we know that's what he's doing? Well, I think it's obvious just by his prowling behavior, but it gets more morbid. The interior CCTV catches Coach E in the kitchenware aisle. He's clearly on a mission to pick out a weapon, to aid him in this quest to render an unsuspecting woman unconscious, so that he can have his way with her. He looks at all the options, literally scratching his head, wondering what he should choose, and finally, he grabs a rolling pin. You know, what you usually use to roll dough? And he slaps it in his hand, testing out its force. But then he puts it back and continues walking down the aisle, still looking. But minutes later, he comes back, retrieves the rolling pin again, kind of feeling it, seeing if it'll do. He takes a few last looks around before he grabs an energy drink and chili powder, then checks out with those 3 items and a bag. The evidence even showed that he used his bank card at this store. He didn't even bother to use cash. Investigators believe these were pretty odd items to buy together, but maybe he was going to throw the pepper in someone's face. The energy drink, well, he's about to attack someone, so I guess that made sense. He needs a little extra energy. It's pretty sickening. And we're watching someone plan a murder. Just remember that as he's walking down these aisles, he knew exactly what he was going to do. And it actually makes me sick, thinking about how he's calm and collected. Like this was just an ordinary shopping trip. He goes back to his car, he opens the trunk to retrieve his hoodie, and that's when he sees something better inside. He leaves the rolling pin in the trunk, and he pulls out a traffic triangle from the bottom of that trunk area. It's one of those emergency reflective traffic triangles used to alert other drivers that they're approaching an unexpected stationary vehicle. This is a common piece of road safety equipment found in most vehicles in the UK. Now, you might be a little confused, because wouldn't it be obvious? Well, when these are unfolded and set up, they do form a 3D triangle, and they're pretty sizable. The base is typically weighted or stabilized to ensure it remains upright, but they come packaged in a flat, compact shape like this if you're watching. They're folded down into a straight line about 2 feet in length, and they have a bit of weight to them, 4 pounds to be exact. Definitely heavier than that rolling pin, and they're made of metal. He kept it folded. That's what was in his hand, causing the glimmer in the park at night. And that was what was captured on CCTV in Pegler Square when he returned with it in his hands. It's red. Now, his choice to grab the triangle instead of going with a rolling pin ultimately gave him away. At 8:08 p.m., he enters the park, a whole 22 minutes before the attack. He's seen on camera just walking around looking for a victim. He's a predator looking for prey. He's got his hood up over his head, and he's hiding and waiting for a woman that's walking alone, and that's when he sees Sabina, and you know the rest. He hit her 34 times with this hard, rigid metal traffic triangle with such force that it began to unfold, and he continued hitting her with it until part of it broke. Then he left the park just before 9 p.m. He walked back to his car, put the triangle in his trunk, and then he drove away to Eastbourne, back to the Grand Hotel like nothing happened. He's seen on lobby footage 4 minutes after midnight, returning with his duffel bag and heading to his room. They got him. He had the same sweatshirt and black shoes with the white soles on during the check-in at the lobby, at the supermarket, and in the footage in Pegler Square. It's him. It's obvious it's him. But now they have to prove it with enough evidence. He killed an innocent woman because he was rejected by his estranged wife, and he wanted to pleasure himself and take his anger out. It's disgusting. I couldn't sleep for days after researching this case because I could imagine being Sabina, just walking in my local park on my way to meet a friend and being caught off guard like that. How horrifying that must have been. How painful and scary. And there's no reason that this should be happening to us. No reason for someone to lose their daughter like this. Kochi checked out of his hotel the next day. He went to work like nothing happened. And for 9 days, he acted normal. And he thought he got away with it. He thought he planned well. A faraway place, an alibi at the hotel. Even his wife saw him. He took Sabina's clothing. He wiped down the bench. But sir, you forgot you had a digital footprint. Police showed up at Kochi's apartment in the early morning hours of September 26th with an arrest warrant, and they took him into custody. And once in custody, suspects are allowed to be kept for 24 hours until police have enough evidence to hold them longer. Then it can be extended to 36, 48, and then 96 if police have the authority. So there was a lot of pressure for them to find the murder weapon and the clothing he was wearing, and most of all, Sabina's DNA. But with all the time that had passed, they didn't expect to find any of that. But when they searched his apartment, they located the exact black Skechers sneakers with a thick white sole. And the sweatsuit that he was wearing on the night of the murder, it was actually in the dryer. Now, it did already go through a wash cycle, but at least they had it to compare it to the footage. But they had something better. Sabina's blood was found on the sneakers. A very tiny little droplet on the sole that Kochi probably didn't think was still there. They also located the rolling pin in his trunk, but they still couldn't locate the weapon or Sabina's missing clothing. Detectives got in touch with Ianella, and she was interviewed, and she explained that she had no idea that Kochi was being tracked by police. She said she came by the apartment the night before to retrieve some things and possibly talk to him about their breakup, but she told police that when she saw him, his face was different. He hardly wanted to talk to her, he wouldn't let her inside, and she noticed he was wearing new shoes. Now, he didn't have a lot of money to spend on things like that. That was a luxury for him. So it was definitely something noticeable that he had a brand new pair of shoes. You would think he would throw the other pair away. Maybe he just hadn't gotten to it yet. But now it was her turn to speak to detectives about what she knew. Ianella told them that after they were married, things changed, and she experienced his increasingly erratic behavior firsthand. Things had gotten even worse the last year when Kochi began to pressure her to move to London. But at the time, he was delivering pizzas, and she didn't think they could afford to move, so she refused. That is when he changed. He became cold, aggressive, and then violent. Neighbors even recall hearing loud arguments when they first moved in. But over the next few months, it got worse. He had strangled her on 3 separate occasions. The first time was when Ianella didn't answer one of his calls. He just began yelling at her, saying, "Why didn't you answer your phone?" She said she was just in bed, and she was shocked when he came at her. But then he snapped out of it and he let her go. But he never apologized. And the next time was when he found out that she had spoken to an ex of hers. The final time he tried to hurt her was when she came home from work and brought him home some food that she knew he liked. But instead of being thankful, he was dismissive and aggressive, and she didn't know why. She didn't know why he was treating her so badly. She felt like he hated her. They weren't sleeping in the same bed anymore. They weren't eating together in the house. And later, when he returned from his late shift at work, he didn't say a word, but he just ran at her, put his hands around her neck, and started to choke her, and she thought she was going to die. He throttled her. He got her to the point where she would almost pass out, or she would actually pass out. And then he would let her come to, and for some reason, he stopped before ever killing her. The last time he did this was in August, when she finally decided she wanted to leave him for good. She was so scared. She stayed with him out of fear, and she said she didn't go to police because she didn't think they were going to believe her because she didn't have any visible marks on her, no bruises and no witnesses. And now she feels lucky to be alive, but she was struggling to come to terms with feelings of guilt for not having done something to stop him so he didn't hurt someone else. And she didn't understand why he would choose an innocent girl. She never thought he would get to the point where he would be capable of murdering her or anyone else. Physical, yes. Killing someone, no. She said that she had little to no contact with him for the past 6 weeks until he asked her to meet him on September 17th. And when she met with him, she said he was very anxious and impatient, and she never saw him like that before. She also noticed a bottle of alcohol in his car, and she could smell it on his breath. He wasn't drunk at the time, but he was acting very strangely. Well, it's all beginning to make a lot more sense now. As investigators were buttoning up all their evidence to present it to the prosecution, they realized something. While they were looking at the route he took back home from Kidbrook following the murder, there were 8 minutes unaccounted for, and they realized that Coach went off course. He took a detour on a country road in Tunbridge Wells, close to the River Tees. When he passed a farmhouse out there, his car was actually caught on camera. They realized he most likely stopped in this area to throw evidence into the river. So they get divers out there. They get the Kent Fire and Rescue Service to help them search around Dundale Road. They want to find anything within throwing distance in the water. They use magnets to search the riverbed, and eventually they get a hit. They actually found the traffic triangle. I know. This is great detective work. It's outstanding. They already have him, but this has just added more evidence to solidify a conviction. Now, upon his arrest, he was provided with a translator because he didn't speak English very well. The investigators are pressing him to tell him why he did this, but he won't utter a word. He was calm and collected, and he wasn't willing to talk. And I don't know what the laws are there, but here, it's your right to remain silent. However, he denied any involvement in Sabina's death, and he refused to answer any of their questions. And at the time, he wasn't officially charged yet, so they weren't able to leverage anything to get a confession. But once he was in his cell, they could see him with his head in his hands, pacing up and down. And they think at this point what he did was finally beginning to sink in. On September 27th, the Crown prosecution presented all their evidence, and he was charged with murder, at which point he put his head in his hands, and then it seemed like he wanted to make a deal. He asked through his interpreter, "What will happen to me if I open up now and say everything?" But he was cautioned not to speak. His defense attorney did let the court know his client planned to plead not guilty at the preliminary hearing on September 30th, and that is what he did. There's much more to tell you about what he did, what he said, what he did admit, what he didn't. But before I do, I really want to touch on the second vigil. They put on a second candlelight vigil for Sabina on October 5th, following Coach's arrest. This time, to make a bold statement, hundreds of people gathered in Eastbourne where the killer resided. And in attendance was his estranged wife, Ianella. She was seen bawling in the middle of the crowd and muttering under her breath through tears that it should have been her. It should have been her that was dead, not Sabina. Kind people around her comforted her. And when they realized who it was, one woman allowed her to sob on her shoulder and kept hugging her. And Ianella just kept saying she doesn't understand what Coachy had against Sabina, and that it would have made much more sense if he had killed her, not Sabina. I do feel awful for her. She held a lot of guilt for not doing more when she had the chance. And she was so ashamed to be the wife of a killer, she could barely make it out her front door. And eventually she moved back to Romania. Then on October 23rd, which would have been Sabina's 29th birthday, her family got together and they released balloons to celebrate her life. Everyone in attendance was given packets of sunflower seeds to plant because that was Sabina's favorite flower, and her sister Jabina said, "They're bright and they stand up tall, just like Sabina." She also said that since what happened, She now has to think twice about going out, and it's changed her perspective on everything. Mentioning that she finds the pain of Sabina's death unbearable, she said, quote, "People say I'm so sorry for your loss and that time is a healer, but it's not. It's a load of rubbish. It gets no easier. I want her to walk in the door, but it's never going to happen again." End quote. To honor Sabina, plans were made to design a garden in her name where the children from her school can remember her. They also wanted to create a positive association with green spaces like parks and gardens so that these children won't associate them with their teacher's death and be fearful of such spaces. Lisa Williams, the head teacher, said, quote, "I know very much she would have wanted her children not to be tainted by this. She was young, she was beautiful, and she was an optimist. She would have wanted her children to be full of life and ambition and to support them to get through it." End quote. However, Lisa also pointed out that they would need to talk to the children about safety and how to spot danger and all the other important things that will hopefully protect them from harm. And that's not going to be easy. They're so young, and they should be able to be free to play outdoors with their friends and not think about danger. But that, unfortunately, is the world that we live in. It's not always safe, which is truly sad. But now let me tell you what transpired at the next hearing on December 16th. At this point, Kochi admitted to rendering Sabina unconscious, but said that he did not kill her. So it appeared that he was planning to use a mental health defense. But the prosecution was one step ahead of him. They were like, nope, that's not going to fly, not with all the planning that went into this crime. And by January 27th, Kochi's attorney said that he does not dispute that he is responsible for killing Sabina Nessa. He doesn't dispute the facts of the case presented by the prosecution, except that it was sexually motivated. Yeah, he was having a really hard time admitting that part. I wonder why. He admitted that he was the attacker, but he made it clear that he did not accept that they were saying he removed some of Sabina's clothing, that he raised her skirt up, or that she was exposed. Okay, so how did those things happen? If it wasn't him, then who was it? Some kind of second perpetrator just walking by the scene and coming upon her in the bushes? Come on. And he never elaborated about why he would have even attacked Sabina to begin with. The trial was then set for June of 2022, but on February 14th, the defense indicated that Kochi would finally be pleading guilty to murder at the hearing on the 25th of February, and that is what he did. His sentencing was scheduled for April 8th, and guess what? He decided he didn't want to show his face. He didn't want to show up for Sabina's family and all the other people that he knew would be staring him down. So he remained in his jail cell like the coward that he is. Sabina's family members gave very moving victim impact statements, with Sabina saying that Kochi is an awful human being and doesn't deserve his name to be said, that he's a disgusting animal. And I want to add, I think an animal is too nice of a way to describe him because animals are more civilized. He's a monster. He's evil. Her family added that Sabina had every right to be walking through the park all glammed up and going to enjoy herself after a long week at work. Her parents said that he had no right to take her away from them in such a cruel way, and that Kochi robbed her and them of her life, and they wanted it to be known that she was an amazing role model who defied all norms. She strove to be independent and was powerful, fearless, bright, and an amazing soul, and she died in a way that no one should, and that will torment them all and Sabina's friends for the rest of their lives. Now it was time for both sides, the prosecution and defense, to argue what the sentence should be, with the defense bringing in any mitigating factors. And there were some legal mitigating factors maybe we wouldn't agree should be mitigating, but the fact that he had no criminal record, for example, that is a real legal way to mitigate, that this was his first offense, per se, that they know about, at least. And of course, his upbringing and things like that. But when they were finished, the judge stated that in the absence of any explanation from Mr. Salamaj about why he attacked Sabina, he was going to defer to the prosecution's argument that it was sexually motivated, especially with all of the evidence, at which point the defense attorney said that their client offered no challenge to the prosecution's case. So essentially, he accepts it. He accepts that he attacked her, he killed her, and it was sexually motivated, but he still would not provide any details or explanation for his actions. His defense ended with the statement that their client simply accepted that he had done it and noted that Kochi had given him no instructions to express any remorse on his behalf, which goes to show you how heartless he really is. And of course, as it can be expected, the sentencing did not bring Sabina's family any closure, other than knowing that Kochi would be behind bars. The judge ultimately sentenced him to a minimum of 36 years in prison, but I gotta say, that's all? Because even though he's been deemed dangerous, he did this heinous attack on someone, he still has a chance at parole in his 70s. That's shocking to me, that he can still live a life after taking someone else's this way. But I gotta tell you, he's probably never going to get out, because within a year, he attacked 2 prison guards. They came to investigate some commotion in his cell, and he brutally attacked one of them with a piece of the toilet. It broke off. It was a piece of porcelain. He actually managed to stab that officer in the right thigh and in the arm before more staff members came to subdue him, and then that's when he punched another officer in the face, adding more time to his sentence, and of course, again, showing how dangerous this man really is. While in prison, Kochi's 73-year-old dad, Bash Kim, and his sister, Jolanda, tried to visit him multiple times. And his dad even begged him to tell him why he killed Sabina, but Kochi refused to leave his cell and meet with them. His father spoke to the media and said, quote, "Kochi has a strong character, but now he's realizing what he has done and is shameful, and that shame stops him from meeting with his family," end quote. He actually cut his family off completely, but his dad still tried to make contact with him, saying that he'd like to know from Kochi himself why he did it, adding that the murder of Sabina caused a huge tragedy to her family, and that he still cannot believe that his son was involved, and that it also caused a tragedy for their family as well. He explained that he's an older man suffering from several illnesses after a head operation several years ago, and though he knows his son is a killer, he'd at least like to see him before he dies. The same goes for his mom, who's 70. He said he feels pain for Sabina losing her life, but he also has lost his son. He tried visiting, writing letters, and still no response. He doesn't wish this on anyone. He wanted to make that clear, and that he never had any problems with Kochi as a child, and doesn't understand how he could do this to someone he didn't even know, hit them in the head 34 times. He let the public know that they were so sad for Sabina, that she was a human being that did not deserve to die that way. And he also wanted to apologize to Sabina's family, but unfortunately, he could not get the courage to face them. He told the Sunday Mirror that him and his daughter really wanted to apologize to Sabina's family for what Kochi did, but he just didn't have the courage to come face to face with them. He has 2 daughters himself, and he understands what it would be like to lose one, and he's shocked over the horrendous murder. He didn't think his son could kill a fly, but to be fair, his son left home when he was only 16, so maybe he hadn't turned into the monster that he would later become. But I do feel bad for both of these families. I, of course, have to feel more pain for Sabina's family because Kochi had a choice. Sabina didn't. She didn't choose to be murdered. She wanted to make a difference. And even though it's in such a tragic way, she is, because her story highlights this epidemic of violence towards women and girls. She lives on in all of us, and every single time we tell her story, and every single person who gets to know her by watching videos like this. So please consider sharing this video with someone you think would appreciate hearing it. Spread awareness so that change can happen. I want to end with words from Sabina. She says she hopes for a cultural shift that challenges the conditions in which boys and men are taught that girls and women are inferior and undeserving of respect and protection. She said, quote, "If I can do something from what we've experienced as a family to bring some sort of change, then I will. It will be Sabina's legacy. I want women to be able to walk the streets alone any time of the day," end quote. Thank you all so very much for being here for Sabina's story. I will see you in my next video. Bye.